Of that.
Thank you.
I have cufflinks that are the
Oh,
same.
do you?
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
That's great.
Great. Not many people appreciate that.
Well, and it kind of separates. There's a line in the age where it's like,
That's
what
right.
the heck is that?
I used to walk around with a big 8-track.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody. Well, that's how I decide if a girl's old enough to go out with me or not.
Yeah,
She doesn't know what it
if
is.
they don't, yeah,
She doesn't know what it is.
I like
yeah, it's
She's pretty. I'll give her a couple clues.
yeah, right.
That's fun.
That is great.
Here, tell me, first time you heard music that made you say, "Man, that's what I want to do in life." Tell me about that experience.
Well, it's funny. I can think of 2 times that both were influential. One was I was in nursery school, and there was a girl I liked already in nursery school. I don't know how that is, named Diana. And Paul Anka's song, Diana, was out. And she came over one day, and I used the fireplace as my proscenium arch, and I kind of got in there. Luckily, we didn't build too many fires, so it was clean. And I sang Diana to her. And so that had to have been number 1. And then, of course, number 2 was the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. It's the classic story, but it's absolutely true.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
You probably could have done anything in life. What was it about the music? And let's talk about the advice your dad gave you.
Right. Well, my dad, who's Warren Buffett, and everybody thinks actually that based on who he is now, I must have grown up a certain kind of way. And the truth is, my dad just does what he loves. Still, he's 81, and always has just done what he loved. And so when I was a kid, I didn't have some kind of crazy wealthy lifestyle. I was going to public school. My dad still lives in the house I grew up in. No fence around the house. Nothing. It was just in a typical Omaha neighborhood. And so I didn't see somebody trying to make a lot of money, because that's not what he was trying to do. He was just doing what he loved. And so my mother and father always said, do what you love, whatever it is. And the funny thing is, I played piano from the time I could walk over and bang on it, played it my whole childhood, and never realized that's what I should be doing, because in some ways it came too easy. In some ways I never thought I was good enough. There were other friends of mine in high school that were really good, and so all that stuff that goes in your head about, well, I'm not really that special, and yeah, I can play, but so I went off to college and took everything that ended in 101 or ology, everything I could find, thinking, I love to learn, and I went to a good school, and I should figure it all out. And about a year and a half in, you run out of 101s and ologies, and I thought, it's music. And the thing that changed it for me, honestly, was there was a guy playing guitar in a friend's dorm, and I went to go see him, and he was playing this simple, beautiful music, and I went, oh my God, it's not about how fast you can play, how technical you are, how complicated the harmonies are. If you're playing from your heart, if it's real for you, it's going to probably be real for somebody else. And that changed my whole perspective on what music was about, because I've been playing what was real for me from the time I could, again, bang around. So that really changed my life, seeing that guy play guitar. Now, it turns out that guy was William Ackerman, who started Windham Hill Records. And so at that moment, he was just a guy, and then later on, I thought, oh my gosh, he, started a whole genre, really, of music. And so it was pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 of my favorite artists growing up. Never heard of Windham Hill Record until Michael Hedges
Yeah.
and Michael Mannering.
Yeah.
Both
Right.
those guys. And
Exactly.
I saw them live and was just like,
Oh,
you got to be
yeah,
kidding me.
right,
Man.
exactly.
It either makes you want to quit or keep
Yeah, well,
playing.
yeah,
Or keep
exactly. Yeah.
playing. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's great.
yeah,
So you had that passion,
yeah.
and what advice do you give the people now that come up to you? Talk about your book. What's in your book and about
Right.
the passion and living?
Yeah, well, my book was written mostly because, again, people thought, oh, you must have grown up a certain kind of way with who your father is and stuff. But the truth is, in my own life, what happened is people would meet me and say, wow, you're Warren Buffett's son, you're so normal. And I thought, well, that's nice, but I know how I grew up. Why wouldn't I be normal? And so I realized that by telling my story, it would connect that idea of really finding your passion. It's not about measuring success by dollars or how many records you sell or how famous you are. And when I got into music, I think what I really tell people starting out is I just wanted to get up the next morning and do it again, right? So I didn't think that success was fame and fortune and the million seller. It was just being able to do it the next day and the next day and the next day. And how can you find a way to make that happen? Now, I was very fortunate. My grandfather left me some money, and he left me about $90,000, and this was in the late 70s. So it was a lot of money, but you know, you could buy a house and it'd be gone, or you could buy a few things here and it'd be gone. So it was the kind of thing where I had to think about it, and what am I going to do with this? And again, my dad's best investment advice for anybody is invest in yourself. And so I thought, well, I'm going to take this money and invest in myself. And certainly when you're 19, you think you're the most important thing anyway. So I bought time, really, and I bought a little bit of equipment, and I started recording other people because that was the way to make a living. I moved up to San Francisco, put an ad in the classified ads in the San Francisco Chronicle, and just started recording people out of my apartment. Now, in 1979, that was a pretty radical thing. I mean, most people went into big recording studios and all that. So I had this little teeny apartment studio, started recording people because it was the quickest way to make a little bit of money and get started. And then I'd use all the equipment myself, when nobody else was around, and slowly got into commercials. I had a very lucky break. And again, this is another piece of advice. I was out washing my car, and my neighbor, who I didn't know, was outside and said, "What do you do?" And I explained that I want to write music and I'm doing it in every way I can. And he said, "Well, you should meet my son-in-law. He creates these little 10-second crazy animated things, and they always need music." I said, "Great." And so I met him, and sure enough, he was creating these little 10-second pieces for a new cable channel. And they needed music, and I got paid $1,000 for 10 seconds of music, and I thought, that's the jackpot, and I did as many of them as I could, and it was MTV. I was creating music for MTV, and that led to this whole career in making music for commercials and all of that. And again, the thing that's so important is you're only as good as the last thing you did, basically. So I didn't care that it was MTV. I didn't know what MTV was. I didn't know it was going to be a big deal. I just wanted to do the best job I could at that moment. And that's what somebody else would hire me for if they heard that, right? If I did a good job. And so I looked at it as being in a service industry, not that I was some artist and I was doing some magical thing. And even for a songwriter, starting out, you're serving something, whether it's your own heart, essentially, and just saying, I'm not serving some dream of, again, living in a big house and owning all this stuff. I have to serve the real thing, which is my heart and the truth. And if I can connect to that, I'll connect to everybody, and so that's the best piece of advice, really, is to remember that you ultimately just want to get up and do it tomorrow, and so you want to do the best you can and do it as authentically and true to yourself as you can.
Want to share a mistake or two along the way that you would...
Oh boy, well, there's plenty of them, certainly, and I'm trying to think of some really good ones. One thing I was fortunate, and again, because I saw my dad put one foot in front of the other and just do what he loved, so I missed some of those mistakes of kind of jumping the gun and thinking, let's try this, let's try that, and kind of jumping ahead of, in a way, my own abilities at the time, kind of thing. But, for instance, I wanted to get into film, and I was fortunate enough to get a record deal in the New Age genre because I was writing a bunch of instrumental music. And Kevin Costner heard some of my music, and he wanted me to score the film Dances with Wolves. And while this wasn't a mistake, it kind of was, because I wasn't prepared. I wanted to get into film. I thought, this is going to be great. And then I got the chance of a lifetime to score this epic film. And there was no way I could do it. I was not ready for that. I mean, I had no scoring, capabilities in that scale, and I didn't really have the connections and the relationships to help me do that, because a lot of people, will write the melodies and then have an orchestrator come in and all that, but I had no preparation really for the chance I got, and so I lost it. Now, luckily, Kevin asked me to score a small piece of the film, and so I got kind of the scale of the job I was prepared for, and I did it, and he loved it, and that was great. But then another mistake followed that one. So here I had this 2 minutes in this film that was massive, which again, I was just doing my job. We didn't know Dances with Wolves was going to be big. I just did what I could do. Ended up being huge, and I didn't fight for my piece to be on the soundtrack, and John Barry resisted because he wanted the soundtrack to be all his, and he's a wonderful guy, but that was a little frustrating, and so I didn't fight for that, and so I lost out on a multi-platinum CD, and then I did get the ability to put it on my own record that was on Narada. It was my third instrumental album, and I didn't have the wherewithal to say, okay, how should I recreate this song so it's radio friendly? I could only hear it as the thing I created for the film, and missed a huge opportunity to have that thing on the radio and really push my career. So those were big mistakes, basically built on not thinking, not pushing from my own sense of ability or confidence, really self-confidence. I was not pushing from a place of, hey, I did a good job. I'm worthy of this. I should put this out. I should work on it. I didn't have the confidence really to push, and so I missed out like multiple times just with that one experience.
Yeah, a fun question, just always to ask, and it can be whatever comes to your mind. But now, having done it for all these years, if you could go back to your, well, it sounded like you were a late bloomer and started at 2 or 3 or whatever.
Yeah, right.
When you were, but what advice, just about anything that you've learned and processed and worked through, what advice would you go back and give your 10-year-old, 15-year-old self?
Right.
And say, hey, if I could tell you a couple things, knowing what I know now, to do differently, to do this way, to maybe. And you've already shared a lot of great stuff because of your background and all that. But if there's a couple things.
I think what I would tell myself, and I'll keep talking to you, I guess, to keep it consistent, right? I think if I could go back and say something to my 10 or 15-year-old kid is to have the confidence in yourself, because I really didn't think I was good enough. I mean, it happens to all of us. We have these voices in our head that say, maybe next time or something. But I would give myself an extra shot of confidence. At the same time, maybe it helped build my character to learn the confidence over time. But I do think I missed out on some real opportunities by not feeling confident enough at the time, to really kind of jump in and say, I can do this.
How did you, real quick question, how did you, some of the, getting those deals, or getting in front of Kevin Costner? I know some things snowball,
right.
But, how did you obviously get into some of those doors? Networking or approaches or ideas?
Yeah, well, it's funny because, again, with the MTV thing, I was out washing my car, but I was talking to somebody. I mean, that's the key, is to kind of start the conversation, and you never know where it'll lead. And my Kevin Costner story is my favorite, because when I realized Kevin was making this film, and I felt like I had the music he had to hear, which at least I knew that much, I thought, how am I going to get it to him? And I remembered that I had gone to college with a guy who married a woman whose father was Costner's agent's best friend. And, exactly, those are some degrees of separation. But it got me there. And my music was handed to Kevin at lunch one day, by the agent. And he called me up and said, I love it. And so you don't know when and where certain relationships are going to lead to other things. I mean, I heard some great stories today from some songwriters, who were they're in a club in Nashville and there's 6 people out in the audience, but you don't know if one of those 6 people are going to be somebody that maybe 5 years from now, might lead to something you never could have expected. So, it's all about relationships. It's a cliche, really, but it's true.
Tell us about your process of writing songs.
Boy, my process of writing songs is to try and get out of the way, frankly. I mean, I am fortunate that because I started with my little apartment studio in 1979 and grew up with technology, I mean, the timing couldn't have been better. I was pre-MIDI, pre-digital, pre-sampling, pre-everything, but grew into that, and I always loved technology. So I kind of had this perfect storm of being at the right place at the right time, and learning how to use this stuff, and playing keyboard, of course, helped because it was the interface to the computer. So I just love that world. And so pretty early on, and certainly now, technology doesn't get in the way of an idea, wherever that happens to come from, and the realization of it. And so for me, it's always about just getting out of the way as much as possible, including, again, the voices in your head saying, oh, this isn't very good. The other thing is, as you're getting out of the way, you also have to be the person that you don't know is listening to the song a year from now, right? So it's like, okay, I like this chord change, but is it really taking the listener to the place where I want them to go? Just because I'm in love with the fact that I'd never thought of going from this place to this place on the keyboard, that doesn't mean it's the best thing to do for the song. So it's this very tricky balance of completely trying to remove yourself from the process, and then at the same time, just at the right times, coming in as the editor, which is why producers exist, why co-writers exist, all this thing, because you need some sort of feedback. Generally speaking, I've been fortunate enough to learn how to do that myself through working in commercials and film. You start to kind of learn what the client, and in this case it's yourself in a way, wants to make sure gets out in the world. But it's that fine line between complete abandon and then constant kind of checking in to make sure you're doing what you really want to do.
Have you co-written and talked about that process?
Yeah, it's funny because it's frustrating for me because I love to create it all myself. I just have this little, this thing about going in the room and doing all this stuff and then coming out and going, look what I did. So I haven't co-written very often, and when I do, it's unbelievable. And that's what kills me, because I think I should really do this more, because the times I've worked with other people, the music goes in a place, where it wouldn't go with myself. So I think co-writing is such a valuable process, even if nothing comes of it other than learning more about what you want to do yourself. Whatever it is, bouncing something off somebody else is incredibly valuable. I mean, you look at Lennon and McCartney. I mean, together, even if they didn't literally write the songs together, which they didn't after a while, it was the process of knowing the other one was going to listen to what they did, that kept them honest, basically, and kept them on point. And I think that's true, too. Even if you are in a relationship, whether it's a personal one or a professional one, where somebody's going to listen and critique honestly, it's like it keeps you on your game a little bit, for sure.
You start coming to Nashville and getting in the songwriting circles and in the industry here?
I would love that, actually. We just had the greatest experience today with some great songwriters, and it's like, wow, it would be very fun to come down here and spend a little bit of time, and again, just bounce around with ideas and melodies and all of that. Yeah, it would be a lot of fun.
Let's talk about the seminar you're doing tonight. What do you do with these seminars?
Well, it is, somebody today, when they were talking to me, called it an experience, which I like that, because I call it a concert and conversation, and it's a little bit of everything. So because I wrote this book, which is a complete surprise, and that's part of the creative process that I love, is that I didn't think about writing a book. I was just, first of all, doing what I do, which is write music, and then people, as I got older, were curious about how I got into my own career based on who my dad is, because they think, wow, you're not in investing and you're not in, why music? It's like, well, because actually I do the same thing my dad does. I do what I love. And so I would speak about that a little bit, about the values I grew up with and, how I found my own path in life and that sort of thing. And somebody in the audience said, that's a book. I never thought of that. And so a book came out, and again, the idea of just doing what you do day after day and it leading places that you never would imagine, I think is critical as you get on, as you get older, to tell younger people, to just follow your heart and your path, and it will take you places you can't imagine. If you define success as something and you try and go towards that, forget about it, but if you connect it here and just keep following that, you're going to end up places you couldn't imagine. So my show is kind of the book come to life, because the show came first, then somebody said that's a book. So it's music, and it's me talking about how I grew up and how I found my path, and old pictures from childhood, old commercials, and and questions through the whole show, which is the most fun thing. Is I have the audience ask me whatever they want through the whole show, and so it's very dynamic. It's always a little different, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
I read one quote that I really liked. She said, several of them I like, but no matter how big the house is, as long as there's love. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, exactly. Now I'm forgetting. That's the problem. Somebody calls me on something in the book, and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, right, what was that? Because I
got to remember the 300 quotes I put in the book.
Yeah, right, but as long as they're loving
Thanks,
it,
man.
and yeah, do it, yeah.
Something to that. It didn't matter how big our house was.
Right.
It mattered there was love.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, again, people look to my upbringing and assume, big house, private school, exclusive this, a bunch of that. And that's why I told my story, because the privilege of growing up, it wasn't some privilege of, having a fancy car. It was the privilege of having parents that loved me and said, you are special, but you got to figure that out, in terms of how you're going to express that specialness. We're not going to write you a check. We're not going to tell you what you should be or what you should think, but we will tell you that it's unique and you should find it. And that's a real privilege. And I had grandparents that lived 2 blocks away. I had the same English teacher my mother had. I had a community around me. So it wasn't even just the house, but it was the whole sense of feeling safe, really. And in that safety, I realized I could allow my mind to wander, because I knew I was loved. I knew I was protected. So suddenly I could hear melodies in my head because there was the freedom to do that. And that's really, there's no better gift than that.
Yeah, and to be celebrated for what you love. That doesn't happen in a lot of places and a lot of families or just in life in general.
Exactly. I mean, so many parents, and the book is as much for parents as it is for kids. So many parents, God bless them, but they maybe didn't get to be what they wanted to be. So they kind of push on their kids. Well, I didn't get to do this, so I want you to be this for me, sort of thing. And maybe it's a greater school that they might go to, or a bigger success in some respected field. But if the kid, my greatest example in the book is in my freshman year of college. This girl on a Sunday, she came running downstairs. She was just practically in tears. She was so happy. I just got off the phone with my dad. I don't have to be a doctor. I can be a lawyer. I thought, man, what if she wanted to be a dancer? There was no room for what she wanted. It was what her dad wanted her to be. And that is a sad story.
Yeah. Think about how many Mozarts or Beethovens or,
Right.
incredibly potentially talented people have squashed that because...
because they were trying to be something for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had no room at all, to move out of that. Yeah.
And that's great, because there's probably a lot of people that just automatically assume, oh, your dad, he let you, he didn't cram you into the body.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I take my show to China quite a bit, and they just can't even believe. They think I've grown 3 heads or something. They can't believe I'm
well, for
saying
them,
what
that
I'm
culture
saying.
is very...
Because the culture is totally like...
Oh, yeah.
What your parents tell you to do, you do, and what your dad does, you do, and what that whole thing.
Right.
And they worship my dad over there. They just think he's the greatest. So when I go over and say, well, guess what? My dad said I could be what I should be in my life. And he didn't write me checks to do it. He said, figure it out.
Any books that you recommend people read? Maybe growing up or in life that really help? Develop that confidence or something.
Question. Yeah.
But you got this really good book he wrote himself, I think.
Yeah, right, exactly. Read my book. That's what the thrill of writing the book, frankly, was, that I could put all this stuff that I had grown up around, and other people's stories too. It's not just about me, but I could put so much of that into the book. And so, as silly as it sounds, or self-promoting as it sounds, I would read my book, because I think it's a great gateway into thinking for yourself, really, and thinking what's right for me. I grew up, I read a lot of different things, but they were mostly almost like Eastern philosophy kinds of things, in terms of just how you fit into the world, and feeling that it wasn't a judgmental world, or a world that was going to kind of look that, you know, because religions can do this, lots of things can do this, where you think, wow, I've got to perform for somebody else for some other reason. And so I read a lot of books early on that kind of made me think about my place in the world and how I can become the best me I can be, as opposed to the best me I can be for somebody else.
That's
Do you
great.
have anything? I know you have a sound.
Yeah, we're at
check.
25 minutes too, so I don't want to.
Oh, great.
I know you're on a.
Yeah, I
schedule.
know you got to.
No,
Yeah.
this has been good. This has been great. We captured a
Yeah,
lot of
okay.
great stuff. And,
Excellent. Yeah. Okay.
is there any what's your, as far as, I don't know, either you or her, contact information too for us to connect and make sure we can post?
I have it.
Okay, how are
Yep.
from
Shannon,
the videos and stuff,
if
so
you've
we
got Shannon,
can.
you've got the
Okay.
connection. Yeah.
Well, I just want to make sure we can point to your websites and point to
Sure.
your different,
Yeah,
you know,
fantastic,
stuff
yeah.
that you're trying to, promote. We
Yep.
want to make sure we
Thank
connect that to the video part and
Great.
the written part. So
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
awesome.
All right.
No, great.
Anything else you want to say to songwriters or people, motivate them? Anything?
Boy, I think I said it, you know, because it really is so much about just connecting to who you are, you know, authentically and truly, and that takes some time to work out, you know. But you can work it out through song. That's the best part. I know that's what I did. I mean, I wrote more music in my early years, not realizing it was about me, you know. And then I look back and I go, wow, I was working out a lot of stuff, you know, and that got me to a real, you know, authentic place.
What was it like? I was the MTV generation.
Yeah.
I was working in radio in '82 when it came out. What was that like? What tuning in it?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny because one of the things I did that probably, well, I know it helped me tremendously, but it's not what normal musicians do, certainly, is I got married when I was 22, and that was in 1980, I guess, or 81, 80. And the woman I married was incredibly dynamic and a great manager, essentially. So she really pushed me further than I would have pushed myself. And I think that's important for some songwriters, is to associate yourself with somebody that if you won't push yourself, they might push you. You know, they might get you out in front. I mean, that's, again, why managers and agents and things can be very valuable. If you get the right one that really believes in you and kind of pushes you into that spot that you might not, that can be incredibly valuable. So I got married young, and she had two wonderful daughters. So I was a father, and, you know, thinking about a family when I was doing those MTV things. So to me, it was a paycheck. It was a lot of fun because it was music, of course. But I wasn't reveling in this generation of hipness and coolness at MTV. I was like going home and, you know, getting the kids up for school and all that. So it kept me honest. I think that was very good, actually. It was good for me anyway.
Well, what I love about just hearing you talk too, and visiting the site and learning a little bit more about you and your music is, it's very different. A lot of people, it's a consumerism. It's a product. Yours is like a holistic part of who you are. It's your life. You're just extending and going, great, I get to do what I love and extend to myself. And it's so different when I see people in the two different camps.
Right.
And
exactly.
I really appreciate that, because that's why it drew me to New Age music.
Right,
When I was
yeah.
young and reading books like, Way of the Peaceful Warrior and Jonathan Livingston Seagull and all these cool
Exactly.
books that kind of similar maybe to
Yep.
what you were talking about. But
Yep,
it was
exactly.
doing music because it just was therapeutic. It was just part of me that I could just, I don't know, it
Yeah.
wasn't separate. It was part of,
Yeah.
it wasn't this
yeah.
thing I sold as a product or a consumer thing. I
Right.
love to hear that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's very
thank
refreshing.
you so much, because it's true. You know, we live more and more in a world that's based on a transaction as opposed to a relationship, right? And music falls right into that now too. It's about, you know, consumerism and units and quarterly reports and, you know, what have you done for me lately, as opposed to the relationship aspect, which of course is what people are dying to hear in music, but they're having to find it. I mean, luckily with the ability to make music easier and internet and everything, you can start to find that music again that connects to something soulful, as opposed to just something you're getting hit over, you know, time and time again. And you know, that's what I've been surprised at with my show, because if I just went out and I talked, you know, if I read from the book and spoke about values, that might be helpful for some people, but to add the music in, and it's funny, I've been doing music all my life, of course, but to really realize that it's vibrational. I mean, you put this frequency out there, and it touches people in a way that words can't, you know, nothing, images can't. It's magical stuff, but it's really magical if it's real. You know, it doesn't work if it's just oh gee, I got to make a hit record. I mean, it might sell a lot and you might make some money and all that, but it's not going to do the transformational stuff that music has the unique capability to do.
Awesome.
Now I think I've said everything.
No, that's
possible.
great. I'm
Yeah,
glad you
that
got
was
to throw it
great.
in.
Yeah,
No,
that
thank
was
you,
really
thank you.
good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's usually what happens in these. Okay,
Sure.
we're about through.
Exactly.
Keep
And
them
then-
talking.
yeah.
And didn't even know the camera was on and it
Right.
came out.
Yeah.
But no, we appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm really.
Thank you so much.
We admire you for what you're doing. I'm
Yeah.
really glad you're connecting in Nashville with
Yeah,
Bart
this
and
is
everyone.
great. Yeah.
We want to see you down here, take you
Yeah.
to some shows.
Yeah.
I sent an email to Brittany and I didn't know your schedule, but
Yeah.
you need to go. I didn't know